Well, good morning. Good to see all of you. Thank you for being here this morning. I want to welcome those who are watching by live stream as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you'll soon join us here in person at First Temple. We have classic services at 8 and 9:30, and modern services at 9:30 and 11. So at 9:30, 2 hours going on at the same time. We'd love for you to come and join us sometime soon. And to all the dads watching online or here in the room, happy Father's Day. I get to do something you don't get to do on Father's Day. I get to preach. I get to preach twice. And then I can take the rest of the day off. But anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day today. And of course, we're thinking about our dads today. Valerie and I are thinking about our dads, both of whom now are in heaven. And I want to say thank you on behalf of our family for all the love you've shown us over the last several months, with Valerie's dad passing away in January due to COVID, and then her mom passing away Memorial Day. I pray, thank you so much for your prayers, your cards, your gifts, your food, your flowers, your prayers. Thank you for all that you've done to express your love to us. We say thank you. And I'm thinking about my dad today. I lost my dad in 2009 when he left for heaven. And I think about how my dad provided for us always provided for his family. He was a school teacher for 36 years, but every summer in those weeks and months that a teacher doesn't actually teach in the classroom, though they're under contract, Dad always took on a second job, and just to make sure that we were provided for, taught me extremely serious work ethic, all those little snippets of guidance he gave me, and then, of course, his discipline. And y'all know what kind of discipline I'm talking about. Yeah, woodshed kind of discipline. I literally, a few weeks ago, went to change clothes real fast to get somewhere, and I took my belt off too fast, and it went pop, 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 pop through those loops, and I got weak in the knees just hearing that sound. It was just an amazing thing. This morning, as we continue our series about loving our neighbor as ourselves, our good neighboring, we're going to look at the marks of love, what love is, what love isn't, what it does, what it doesn't do. And in honor of our dads, I thought I'd bring a little humor this morning. Is, isn't, was, wasn't, pheasant. I thought I'd share that with you this morning. Just my little form of dad joke, all right? We've been talking about this good neighboring stuff, and what we learned the very first week was that Jesus told us that we're to love our neighbors as ourselves. In other words, good neighboring is more than just being nice. Don't you wish, at least I do, that he had just said, be nice? But that's not what he said. What he said was love your neighbors as yourselves. And this idea of love that he shared was not some kind of like brotherly, friendly kind of love. Kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of love. It was the kind of love that God has for us, that Jesus has for us, agape love. There's three characteristics we've been talking about the last couple of weeks of this love. The first one is, it is a fierce commitment to the good or benefit of another, the one you're loving, even at one's own expense. Secondly, this kind of love is given regardless of whether it is deserved. Ugh. And will be reciprocated. And thirdly, this kind of love, the kind of love that God has for us, that we're to have for our neighbors, is sourced in the nature of the lover rather than the attractiveness or inspiration of the one being loved. So this is steep stuff. This idea of loving our neighbors as ourselves, practicing this good neighboring. Last week we saw in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter in the New Testament, where Paul expressed to us that love is superior to everything. Love takes supremacy, so that even if we're a good neighbor on the outside, if we're acting nicely and doing things for our neighbors and being a good neighbor, it doesn't count if it's not based or sourced or founded on that love that we're to have for our neighbors, like God had for us. So as we do this, as we practice this kind of love, what does it look like? What are the marks of it? When I demonstrate it, what do I see? What do others see? Well, that's what Paul is going to talk about this morning in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. So if you're willing, take your copy of God's Word and open up your print copy or open up your app or whatever you're using at home on your tablet or whatever. Just look in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 7. We put it in the app because we always want you to be able to see it in the translation that we're going to be reading from. So today, as it is on the church app, I'm going to be reading from the New American Standard Version, which is the version I usually use most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. Paul says, love is patient. Love is kind. And is not jealous. Love does not brag. It is not arrogant. Does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It's not provoked. Does not take into account any wrong suffered. Does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Now, of course, Paul uses this same word for love that Jesus used, this agape kind of love. And he gives us very specific parameters for what this love is and isn't and does and doesn't do. And it's interesting how he does it. He's really kind to us. He puts kind of the tougher negative part of this in the middle, what it isn't, what it doesn't do, and wraps it nicely with bookends of what it is and does do. And so I want to start with kind of the harder part. You know, whenever you and I get good and bad news, we're given that option of, which one do you want first? I always take the bad first, just to get it out of the way. So I want to talk about that, the harder part of this, what love isn't, what it doesn't do. Look there with me. What Paul says is this, it isn't jealous. It is not envious. It doesn't brag. It's not arrogant. It's not disgraceful. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking or easily provoked. Ouch. I might need to camp on that one just a little bit. It doesn't keep a list of wrongs done to it. I don't know about you, but I find those things hard. That list of stuff is hard for me. I think about those people, my neighbors in the checkout line at Walmart. You know, not just the ones that live by me, but the ones I share the byways and highways of life. The ones that cut you off in traffic that you share lanes with at West Adams. If you're going to go east on West Adams and you're going to get on the loop, get over to the right before the last second. Okay, I'm sorry. This is supposed to be about love. I lost it there for a minute. I apologize. Those people who take 20 items through the 10 item or less checkout lane. Can I get an amen? Those people who wander, meander, amble down the middle of the driving lane in the parking lot, not looking for their car, talking on their phone. Those neighbors who do not bag up after their puppy uses your yard. The yard you just got through mowing and trimming and blowing the clippings of, and you're sipping tea in the window watching how nicely it looks. Love is not impacted by that. Love is not fazed by that. Love does not keep that kind of record or that account. I hear the words of my daddy in his guidance through the years. Son, God is the keeper of such accounts. You don't have to worry about keeping up with all of that. The Lord is the keeper of those accounts. As I said, Paul talks about what love isn't, what it doesn't do, but then he talks and wraps around in bookends what love is and what love does do. Let's look at those words. Love is patient. It's kind. It values truth and honesty. It holds in confidence things shared with it. It looks for and finds the good and best in others. It trusts first before it asks to be trusted. It endures. It perseveres. Next Sunday, we're going to look at how love really is for the long haul perseverance of life. These things love is. These things love does. I share a truth my dad lived by that I have tried to emulate through life, but it is very, very challenging and very counterculture. Son, live by trusting people until they give you a reason not to trust them. That is so backwards of how we usually do life. But that's how my dad lived life, making himself an easy mark sometimes, or vulnerable to where people could take advantage of him. But the Lord is the keeper of those accounts, son. Live your life trusting people until they give you a reason not to. I think that's what Paul says love does. It trusts first. It believes all things. It hopes and looks for the good in others first. And it perseveres. It endures. You may be thinking, well, that kind of living sounds risky. I'm not sure this whole idea of loving is risky. I don't know. That's how you get hurt if you extend yourself out. It doesn't seem a smart thing to do or a way to live. And the answer to that objection is you're absolutely right. It is absolutely risky. And yet that's exactly what God asks us to do. To love others as we love ourselves. To be that kind of good neighbor, someone who's doing more than just being nice, but actually loving like God loves us. We are called to love our neighbors, even trusting them until they give us a reason not to. It is risky, and God knows that. Because of what he risked in extending his love toward us. You see, Christ, in going to the cross, knew that the vast majority of humans throughout the span of time would ignore, stay independent from, or outright reject and stiff-arm his love, even in dying on the cross. Most of the people across the globe and across the span of time, even those who've heard of this, will say no to it. It is the narrow path, Jesus said, that leads to life. In other words, the vast minority of people will respond to this kind of love. And yet Christ loved us enough, even those who would say no, that he risked dying on the cross on our behalf. It is risky. It doesn't make sense to our culture. There is so much to lose. It's how you get hurt. But what is the alternative? In his book, The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis wrote an incredible paragraph describing what it is that is the alternative. If we say no to this kind of risking, vulnerable love, love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly shattered. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, in that coffin, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to love, to risking tragedy and brokenness, is nothing short of damnation. The only place outside heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and risks of love is actually hell, where God is not. Jesus challenges us to take that kind of risk in loving our neighbors. It's more than just being nice. It's all these things, all these marks that the Apostle Paul described in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I want to give you an action step this morning to start with, and it is take some time this week to stop and remember the risk God took in extending his love to you through Christ. Back when Valerie and I lived in Waco for 24 years, I, a couple times a year, would go down to St. Louis Catholic Church and just sit in that sanctuary and meditate on, focus on the life-size and a half crucifixion. A beautifully hand-carved version of Jesus on the cross. And we Baptists, y'all, we Baptists so much prefer the empty cross because it focuses on the resurrection. And mind you, Jesus did raise from the grave, but not in first until he went to the grave for you and for me. So this morning, I want you to do something. I want you to practice a little bit this, what I'm asking you to do. I want you to take the next 30 seconds to play like you're the only person in this room. I want you to look at nothing but this image of Jesus on the cross on the screen and really do your best to phase everything else out. Don't look anywhere else but right there at what Jesus did for you on the cross. Take 30 seconds to do that. "30 seconds is a long time. I want to challenge you this week to find a version of Jesus on the cross. Maybe you have a crucifix in your home, even though you're Baptist. I know it sounds a little bit crazy for a Baptist pastor to go to the back of a Catholic church. It's something I still do sometimes. Maybe you would find a picture of it online. You can print out and put up in your room. Maybe you can order a cross with Jesus still on it to focus on his love for you. How glorious it is that Jesus raised from the grave, but the deepest expression of his love for us is his death on the cross. In the early 90s, my mom had some major health issues going on, and she had to have some surgery. And in her recovery in a Catholic hospital, I went to visit her, young Baptist minister. I thought it'd be the appropriate thing to do, visit my mom in the hospital, make a pastoral care visit. I got to her room. She was sleeping, and I noticed that there was, since it was a Catholic hospital, a form of the crucifix on the wall. I got to look at it more closely, and I realized that you could detach Jesus from the cross. So being the good Baptist minister that I was, I did that and laid Jesus over on the table and put the cross back up. My mom awakened from her recovery nap, and she goes, "Where did Jesus go?" And I said, "Well, I put him on the desk over here." She goes, "Put him back on the cross." A dutiful son, I put him back on the cross. And she said, "I need Jesus on the cross right now because as much as I suffer, I'm reminded that Jesus suffered even more for me." Spend some time this week focusing on remembering the risk God took in extending that kind of love to you through Christ. That's the kind of love we are called to give to our neighbors. Now, as a second action step, I want to ask you to look at this text again in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, and use the names of your neighbors in the passage. Do you know the names of your neighbors? A couple of weeks ago, I shared with you a story about a new couple that I had begun to wave at on my way out of my neighborhood on the way to church. You remember that? I was telling you that story and how they were waving back, and for 3 weeks, I waved and they waved back, or they saw me first, they waved and I waved back, and finally, I told you I was going to learn their names. Well, I pulled my truck over the next Monday morning and kind of made them a little nervous probably as I did that, but I stepped out of my truck and I walked over to them and introduced myself. Their names are Leonard and Terry. So I now have 2 new friends named Leonard and Terry that I wave at. So maybe you would think of your neighbors' names as you go through this exercise with me. Maybe you want to print this out this week or figure out a way to do this where you put your neighbors' names in this text in this way. Follow along with me as I do it. Love is patient toward Leonard. It's kind toward Terry. It's not jealous or envious of David. It does not brag to Susan or try to one-up or compete with Joyce. Love does not try to outshout Frank or use Jim for personal gain. Love does not keep a list of wrongs committed by Jonathan or rejoice when David fails at something or is going through a tough time in his life. Love keeps things, Sharon says in confidence. Looks for and finds the good in Jesse. Hopes for the best in Mark. Love risks loving that neighbor whose dog used my yard and shall remain nameless for this particular moment in time. Remaining faithful for the long haul or even enduring, persevering in that relationship. So maybe you would practice a little bit this week. Putting the names of your neighbors in this text. Love is patient toward. Love is kind to. Is not jealous over. Love does not brag, is not arrogant. Does not act unbecomingly toward. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked by, fill in the blank. You get it. Maybe practice that this week. And then maybe what you would do is actually move into a proactive demonstrating love toward your neighbors. What would that look like? What does that look like in real life? Well, maybe you know of a neighbor that's on vacation. You know when they're coming back from vacation. And the day before or morning of their return from vacation, you notice that their yard is a jungle they're going to have to deal with when they get back, and you go over and mow and trim their yard or pay to have it done so that when they get back, they don't know who to thank. You did it anonymously. They have no idea who did it, but it keeps them from having to do that. Maybe you're a handyman or a handy woman and you would offer services for free to an elderly person in your neighborhood or to a single mom. You drag your ladder over to a neighbor's house and you get up on that ladder and change the air conditioning filter when it's time. Or that light bulb that's been out for a while because that neighbor has no business being up on a ladder. Maybe you provide free child or babysitting to a couple who is in desperate need of a date night. Or for a single mom who needs a break. Maybe you know of someone who's a neighbor who's suffering. And you go and just sit with them and drink coffee or tea and just listen. You're not there to share advice or fix the problem. You just sit and share in their suffering. Maybe there's that neighbor that routinely invites the masses to their pity party. And you decide that the most loving thing is that you would be the one person who actually RSVP'd and showed up, and let them have their pity party in front of you. And you just be present in love. Now, as I mention these suggestions, your mind starts firing with all kinds of ideas that you can do. This week, do those things, church. Love your neighbor as yourself. So for the past several months, I have asked you to practice something with me at the end of sermons without probably explaining what we're doing well enough. So I want to do that now. About a year ago, I think I've told you that I entered into a 3-year journey with a group of about 40 other believers across the globe in a spiritual formation cohort. We meet every other Thursday evening for 2 hours online, where we listen to a teaching, we discuss it together, and we share what we sense God is doing in our individual lives. And I'm so looking forward to September, because in September, the 40 of us are going to spend 8 days together in person in Phoenix. I know, September, Phoenix. It's a dry heat. It's going to be okay, all right? But what we do as someone teaches or leads discussion, or we share something from what we see God doing in our lives, whenever that person talking is finished, whether it's a 30-minute lecture or teaching, or a 10-minute leading a discussion, or someone shares something from their lives in 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, what we've gotten into the habit of doing is stopping before we do anything else, before any response, and we just stop for 60 seconds of quiet to listen to what the Spirit of God might be saying to us in that moment. So that's what I would like to invite you to do. Take 60 seconds, heads bowed, eyes closed, tuning everything else out, listening for the voice of the Spirit of God, giving you something, the takeaway from this message.